quit talking.
Well, probably can't wait till then.
What was the final score?
I think it's something like 42-10.
42.
Get to everybody gets situated.
Play and I figured it out.
Yeah.
Lynn, how's the cat doing with the chicken?
I haven't seen the chicken. I've only seen pictures of the chicken with my husband holding it.
The chicken helped Russell with the yard work.
Oh, I have. I was out running.
And he was blowing leaves. The chicken
Yeah.
leaf
was going
thing
up and
while it
back,
was still,
up and
one
back.
day it was dry to get.
I told
Okay.
her, please do
Yeah,
not
next time-
feed it.
That was the black.
Really?
I do not want a chicken that I have to
You don't have to feed them, they just.
Somebody down
I
there.
resident chicken.
I don't want them to become too.
Well, you would like their eggs, I bet.
Free range chickens.
Really?
Fun.
That just sounds like.
And, you know, once they get out,
Some people just love.
I know.
You got a new chicken.
I like them when they're in a coop.
dark and black.
Like a lid.
Yeah, I know. We have more
The
than one.
hens.
How many we have?
Is everybody here?
Eric had it.
Are we
I don't know why
ready?
I was holding it.
Is everybody here? Are y'all ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We're gonna do a little something different for Christmas this year, as opposed to our usual traditional nativity story. We're gonna talk about Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol and how we're gonna bring the biblical aspects into it. As you know, Christmas starts in this country on the day after Halloween. Or before. So, every year we have new songs, new movies, new everything coming out at Christmas time. But it's the old classics that really stand the test of time. Most of our Christmas carols go back 100, 200, 300, more 100 years. The Dickens' Christmas Carol is one of these classics that never gets old. It was first published in 1843 and was originally titled A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. Thankfully, it got shortened over the years. So what do you think of when you hear the word carol?
Song.
Song. Mm-hmm. One definition of a carol is an old round dance with singing. Just as a round circle, has no beginning and no end, the carols of our faith seem timeless. So perhaps Dickens wanted his story to be shared over and over again, like a familiar carol, to bring people together. And just like the Christmas carols we sing, a Christmas carol is divided into sections or verses called staves, which I never realized. S-T-A-V-E-S, staves. With each section, each stave, just like a verse of a Christmas carol, offers an independent thought. Over the years, a lot of our culture has Scrooge. When you hear the word Scrooge, what do you immediately think of?
Stingy.
Stingy, yep. Scrooge has become a synonym for greed and stinginess. Bah humbug is part of our vocabulary. How many times do you hear that all through the year? Scrooge is an iconic figure who represents stinginess, greed, and generally an ornery old cuss, you know. The name Ebenezer, I thought this was really interesting, has become so unpopular that in England in 2013 there were only 12 children named Ebenezer. Their parents must not have liked them.
The man that founded Erskine College was Ebenezer Erskine. Oh, I knew it was named for Ebenezer Erskine.
However, Ebenezer is a Hebrew word meaning stone of help. And it's referred to in 1 Samuel, 7th chapter. And you know, there's a song. What's the song?
Here I raise my
Here I raise my Ebenezer. Okay. Anyway, we know it. Even though by the end of the story, Ebenezer Scrooge is this changed person. The character he represents is still a caricature of everything that Christmas should not be. It seems that we can't, all we see is the bad part of it. We can't seem to accept that he has been redeemed by the end. So if he can be redeemed, so can we. Stave 1, verse 1. Well, first of all, is anybody not familiar with this story? How many of you have read it? How many of you have seen a movie version? I mean, every Mickey Mouse has had, Donald Duck had a version. The Muppets have had a version. There are all kinds of movies out. There's cartoon versions. There's stage plays. There's Shakespearean actors that perform it on stage. Is anybody not familiar with the story? I mean, surely you've all heard the story. Okay. It starts, like a ghost story. The first paragraph says, Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon the exchange for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. That's another phrase we've used. Now that's not a very good way to start a story, is it? When somebody's dead. But Dickens wants to make sure that we know that this is an important fact, that Marley was dead right from the very beginning. And this sort of sets the tone for what's to come. If you think about it, this story deals with the past, the present, and the future. Advent does too. When you think about it. When we celebrate Advent, we think of the past, we think of the present, and the future. The church gathers to celebrate Advent, and we go back in time, like we're doing now, and study the prophets who prophesied the Messiah's coming. We are in the present, looking back at the past, but we're also looking to the future when the second coming occurs. So while this is a story about Scrooge's love of money to the exclusion of everything else, it's also a story about how Scrooge cannot let go of the past. Dickens at the beginning said, we're talking about the Christmas Carol.
Scrooge.
Dickens at the beginning of the story says, Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. Scrooge seems to cling to the past because Marley was probably his only friend. And Marley represented the only thing Scrooge trusts: hard work, frugality, unwavering discipline, and action that can be weighed, measured, and counted. Scrooge himself is described by Dickens as, it's not that thick of a story, but
It's pretty big.
He was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what time it was. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." Now we're going to find out as we go through the story that there's probably a reason Scrooge is so ornery. And sometimes when we look at people, our first impression is a Scrooge. But until you delve into someone's past and see what made them the way they are, you don't understand it. Okay, the story takes place on Christmas Eve, which is Scrooge's least favorite time of the year. He glares at the Christmas carolers. He scolds his one and only poor little employee, Bob Cratchit. And just as he's in the movie version, and the book too, you see the picture, Christmas Eve. It's freezing cold. It's a northern winter. It's snowy and everything. And he has his poor little Bob Cratchit's in there with his little fingerless gloves, trying to do his little books and everything. And he has one coal burning in his little tiny fireplace thing. Scrooge only has about 3 in his. Now Scrooge loves accumulating money. He worships his money. He doesn't spend it on himself. He doesn't spend it on anybody else. He just likes to count it. So just prior to leaving his little counting house, his nephew Fred, who was his only living relative, drops by to pay him a visit and to invite him to Christmas dinner. And his nephew, you get the impression that he's newly married, he's happy, he's just, wants his only relative to come and have dinner with him. So he comes by to ask him to come. And of course Scrooge says, what do you mean by Merry Christmas? Why are you married? You don't have any money. See, he basically, money is his only happiness. And his nephew responds, "Christmas time is a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good, and I say God bless it." Scrooge also asked his nephew, "Why'd you get married?" And Fred says, "For love." Well, Scrooge can't understand that. He has no concept of love in his current life. So Fred can't understand why his uncle is so ornery. Why he's just doesn't like anything, So he goes on his merry way. He gives up on Scrooge. He's not going to come see him and everything. So Scrooge goes on. He goes home. And this is where we have to realize that Marley was dead.
Dead as a doornail.
Dead as a doornail. He goes home and he goes to his door. Now he lives in Marley's old house. See, he still can't let go of the past. He lives in Marley's old house. And it's crumbling, It's like I say, he doesn't spend his money even on himself. He doesn't want to spend it. He just wants to count it, watch it grow. So he goes up the steps, and the door knocker has this big door knocker there, and he's startled because he sees Marley's face in it, and he thinks, well, it's this foggy night, this storm coming, it's after dark, we don't have street lights back then, and thinks, well, I'm just seeing that, and he looks up again, it's gone. So he goes inside, sits down with his little bowl of gruel to eat his supper. And then he hears all this clanking, this noise, and he's like, what the heck? And then he sees this apparition that's covered with chains and locks and heavy things and clonking around, And it looks very much like Marley. Then Marley starts talking to him. And I lost my place. Well, first of all, before Marley comes, he's sitting around his little fireplace, and he's never noticed before, but the Dutch tiles around the fireplace have images of biblical people. Dickens doesn't say how long Scrooge has been ignorant of these things, but maybe he just sat down and for some reason he saw these little tiles and saw scenes from the Bible in it. It's kind of like us going into a beautiful sanctuary with stained glass windows and not noticing them. So, how many times in your life do you go through it not realizing that God is all around you? So, when Marley's ghost appears, Marley has covered in all these chains, and that's part of his punishment, that he will always, forever and ever and ever and ever, have an incessant torture of remorse. Part of Marley's punishment, because Marley was just like Scrooge, they were two of a kind. Part of Marley's punishment is the inability to find peace. So he is doomed to wander around forever and ever, all in these chains with him, because of the way he was in his life. So Marley comes back to tell Scrooge, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't straighten up. Marley offers Scrooge this warning, which kind of echoes one of Jesus' parables, Lazarus and the rich man. In Luke 16, we're told, there was a certain rich man who clothed himself in purple and fine linen, and who feasted luxuriously every day. At his gate lay a certain poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. Lazarus longed to eat the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Instead, dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried by angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. While being tormented in the place of the dead, he looked up and saw Abraham at a distance with Lazarus at his side. He shouted, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm suffering in this flame." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, whereas Lazarus received terrible things. Now Lazarus is being comforted, and you are in great pain. Those who wish to cross over from here to you cannot, neither can anyone cross from there to us." The rich man said, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers. He needs to warn them so that they don't come to this place of agony." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They must listen to them." The rich man said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will change their hearts and lives." Abraham said, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, then neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead." Marley was dead. Marley came back to warn Scrooge. Jesus was dead. He came back to warn us, right? In his life, this rich man, Lazarus, Marley, whoever, could not see the poor man's value as a child of God. The poor man was neither welcome at his table nor worth his time. So in the afterlife, the rich man still sees Lazarus as a servant whose job it is to do his bidding. You know, send Lazarus to dip his finger. Send him to my Father's house. This parable is not about the afterlife or reaping what you sow or anything like that. Instead, it offers a conviction to open our eyes to the value of each and every life. The rich man's torment is his own stubbornness in holding on to the assumption that his life is more valuable than Lazarus's. So Marley comes to warn Scrooge. Hey, look, look at me. Look how awful my situation is. I don't want you to end up this way. Marley's warning can be taken too far, proclaiming that if we're filled with compassion, generosity, and selflessness, we can earn a place in heaven. But we do not, and we cannot earn God's grace. It's a gift freely offered to us. When we learn to accept and share this free gift of grace, we begin to understand that Christ is living with us and that we're here to serve our Father and share that grace with one another. If Marley's ghost were to visit you, what do you think he might say to you? And another part of Marley tells Scrooge, why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eye turned down and never raised them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor child? Were there no poor homes to which its light could have conducted me? Before Marley's spirit disappears, he leads Scrooge to the window to see all these ghosts mourning and crying out and wailing and gnashing their teeth in sorrow and torment. And Dickens writes, the mystery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. Scrooge begins to say humbug to them all, but he can only mutter hum, signaling a glimmer of a change within his soul. These spirits' punishment is being able to see great need in the world and no longer having the ability to intervene. It's almost like they're full of love now, but there's nothing they can do about it. They can't share it. They can't satisfy their hunger to love their neighbor as themselves. At this point in the story, Scrooge's only love of his life is his money. And it's as if Marley's trying to warn him that, in the end, it's not going to fill the void. In the book of Exodus, as Moses was leading the people out of Egypt, remember at first how excited they were, and they made their sacrifices, and they were all, hunky-dory with everything. Let's go, let's go, let's go. But as the journey wore on, and they got hungry, and they got thirsty, and they whined, and they complained, and they moaned and groaned, and God sent manna to them. Remember his stipulation. There's enough for everybody. You just take what you need. You don't try to take more and save it. It will be provided for you every single day, and you eat this much. Well, of course, being humans, well, you know, I'm not getting them. I'm gonna get double. So they got double and everything. And of course, what did it do?
Spoiled, didn't it?
Spoiled. Yeah.
Those are the nuggets.
Yes. So how much is enough? You know, it's kind of like God provided for them, but they still didn't. They didn't trust Him enough, right? They saw this stuff and said manna, which means what is this? That's their food. God had blessed them with whatever it was to get them through the day. Moses told them to get only what they needed. The author of this study says, I've heard hell described as a place in which one can have too much and not enough at the same time. That in hell you can have anything you can dream of. So if I want a 100-inch big screen TV, I can have it. The problem is, the guy living next to me can have my TV too, should he wish it. I would imagine that eventually quarreling becomes so terrible that humanity becomes increasingly isolated. Stuff becomes our master. This hell is a place in which we can have anything we want, but the stuff we want leaves us lonely, isolated, and depressed. There's a story about hell that I've heard where everybody's gathered around this table and they have their little bowls of food and everything. And in hell, they have these long, long, long spoons to eat with. So they try to eat, and then they can't pick up the stuff and put it in their mouth at the same time because of this spoon is so long. So they go to God and talk to him and say, why can't we eat? And he says, because they see the people in heaven have the same situation. They got these long spoons. But the people in heaven take their long spoons and they feed each other with them. They can reach across the table and they can feed each other instead of feeding themselves. So heaven is still, you're looking for other people, taking care of other people. In Matthew 6, Jesus says that you cannot serve two masters. You will either love the first and hate the second, or hate the first and love the second. You cannot serve both God and mammon or wealth. Another way to frame it is you cannot serve manna and mammon. Now, there's nothing wrong with accumulating money, but Scrooge's only love is money. And Marley warns him that this is misplaced love that will become nothing more than heavy chains to drag around the afterlife. In a way, these chains are like the Israelites' life of slavery in Egypt. It wasn't great, but that's what they had accepted as their life. Scrooge had to let go of Egypt. He had to let go of that familiar, comfortable place of slavery. And he was a slave. He was a slave to his wealth, so that his hands could be open to the manna that only God could provide. So think about, what is God calling you to let go of so that you can be free to live out your commitment to Christ? I think we all have something that we need to let go of. Do you know any Scrooges in around your Christmas, any relatives or your church pew or whatever?
Russell had a relative way back who was a Scrooge, and he figured out how he could get more candy than anybody else. He cut
At Christmas.
Christmas.
He wanted full stocking.
He cut a hole in the toe of his, or the heel,
Of the
stocking, and then he put a great big wash tub underneath it.
I take it he was a child at the time?
And then Christmas morning when he went to see what he had gotten, because he thought he'd really outfoxed Santa. Santa had tied a knot in his stocking and had only given him one candy cane.
Took it and tied a knot. He never changed.
That's right.
He died that way.
There are some people
Cheating his family.
who come across as being a Scrooge. Some people hate Christmas. But sometimes if you delve into their past, you know why. Like for instance, this example he uses in the book is this woman, he noticed that Christmas was a terrible time for her. She wouldn't sing the Christmas, she was in the choir, but she wouldn't sing the Christmas carols. She'd sort of sit and worship, like, you know. And then when the kids, kids always make us laugh. Kids can put on any kind of program and we think it's wonderful, right? She would just kind of, distance herself. So one Sunday, this man asked this woman why she was always so depressed at Christmas. And she said, it's just not a happy time for me. And later on, she came back to me and said that her father had died many years ago on Christmas morning. And that all the happiness and cheer went out of her then. So each year, she felt like she was reopening a wound. So before we judge somebody for being a Scrooge and an ogre and a bah humbug person, we need to sort of try and understand there may be a reason for this. And as we go through the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to see that Scrooge's past played a very important part in his present. We all have a story. And we don't always share it with others. We hide our hurts. Sometimes we hide our joys. So next time we run across somebody that we think is a Scrooge or a bah humbug, let's think about maybe stepping forward ourselves. Maybe the first step toward a Merry Christmas is to look at those who are suffering and, quite simply, to see them, to understand them. Christmas is a stressful time. And once you grow up, it's not the same. And once your family members die off, and it is sad. But what are we looking at? We have this concept of the Norman Rockwell Christmas. All the New England Christmas, there's the snow and everything. Well, heck, have you ever seen snow around here much? No. Yeah.
We never dash in the snow.
No, we don't. We squish in the mud.
In the rain.
Slide in the ice.
Yeah. But
Only on the highways.
Christmas is not a Currier and Ives event. Christmas is a biblical event, right? Today is first Sunday of Advent. And today we're going to light the first candle, the peace candle. I had to make sure we were doing the same numbers. Now, when you think of the word peace, what do you think about?
Tranquility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mutual love.
Absence of war.
Yeah.
Calm.
Yeah. I never knew until I actually saw this last night, I think. About 9 o'clock. Did you ever think that peace means an absence of fear?
Yeah, I can see that too.
I never thought about that, but it makes sense. You think about it. In Isaiah, we are told the names, Jesus, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. But Jesus says in Matthew, don't think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I haven't come to bring peace but a sword. At Jesus' birth, the angel says, don't be afraid. Glory to God in heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors. Jesus, before his arrest and crucifixion, gathered his disciples together and said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I give to you not as the world gives. Don't be troubled or afraid. When Jesus was resurrected, he appeared to the disciples, who were, of course, scared to death and hiding in a locked room out of fear. His first words were, peace be with you. So peace isn't a lack of conflict. Jesus is the Prince of Peace because he offers the opposite of fear. Something to think about. Y'all got any questions?
Music, the absence of fear, and I think for everybody, probably that fear could be a different thing.
Yeah.
But we all,
We all fear
things.
something, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this particular lesson today, Marley's fear was not having enough. Not having enough money to eat, to live. And his fear overcame him. He wouldn't even spend his money on himself. I mean, he lived in a little rat hole. And he wouldn't spend money to heat his office. He was afraid of losing everything.
May I say a couple things?
Sure.
I always find it funny that in the beginning when Marley comes to visit him and he's eating, he blames this vision on poor meat.
Yeah.
He thinks he's having indigestion
Right.
or something.
Right.
So he's trying to brush it off as this
Yeah.
didn't really happen.
Yeah.
So again, he's trying to just stay in his own little
Right.
shell, his
Yeah.
oyster shell,
Exactly.
and not listen.
Yeah.
And talking about don't judge somebody until you know how they were raised.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and you look at Dickens and the way he was raised,
Yeah.
he writes many things that are indicative of his childhood and life.
Exactly.
Because he did not have a great life.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't he write the Christmas Carol because he needed money or something?
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't be so quick to judge somebody until you know their background. Any more questions? Let's pray. Gracious God, give us eyes to see the unhappy and the misunderstood, and the ears to hear their story. Help us to share Christ through humble invitation, especially with those who are in need of healing. May Christ's welcoming spirit live within us. Amen. So next week we're going to find out why he's the way he is.
Thank you,
It's a
Judy.
very unique study. I appreciate you.
This is